Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Discriminating Gamer. The other day, I was at a restaurant and somebody yelled, "Does anybody know CPR?" And I yelled back, "Sure do. In fact, I know the entire alphabet." Well, everybody laughed, except this one guy. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to take a preview look at Worldspanner Factions. Worldspanner Factions is the new iteration of one of the all-time great games, Duel of Ages and Duel of Ages 2. Now, this new iteration contains some streamlined rules and a whole lot of new content. Now, if you've played any of the Duel of Ages games, you know the theme. It's the 26th century. You've got people and beings from all over the universe come together to see the Worldspanner games. Now, during the Worldspanner games, you have various figures from science fiction, from fantasy, from lore, and actual historical figures that work together, or I should say, fight together to be proclaimed champions of the games. Now, first of all, you create a map with these various platters. They're almost like jigsaw puzzle pieces. You connect them with the keys, and the keys themselves represent the factions. Now, every character in the game belongs to one of these factions. You'll also notice there are various domes around the map, and they have numbers on them, because that's going to be important. That's going to be where your characters spawn from. But first of all, you need to pick the characters. Now, you're going to set up into teams. This is a team co-op game. So you go ahead, you get your teams together, you select how many characters each you're going to play. Now, this game plays up from 2 to 8 players. So you can go ahead and you can select which characters you want to play. And if your teams are uneven, don't worry about it. You can go ahead and still collect that number of characters. Now, first of all, you're going to spawn. You're going to go ahead and be able to spawn your characters. Once you've got your first few characters, I think it's about a third of your characters spawn initially, you go ahead and you engage in the games. Now, at the end of the game, you'll be able, or the end of the rounds rather, you'll be able to bring in more of your characters. Now, also, you're going to want to figure out how many rounds you're going to go. Kind of the intro scenario is 8, the standard scenario is 10, and the advanced scenario is 12. Now, when you select your characters, you'll notice that you have character cards for each. Now, on one side, they've kind of got the character's backstory, some cool biographical information. But then on the front of the card, you've got a ton of stats, and these things are all going to come into play during the game. So first of all, your characters may start with certain cards. They may be elite cards, secret cards. There's different cards you're going to get. You're going to keep them face down until you need them. Then players are going to go ahead and activate them. Now, when you activate on a round, and you can go ahead, you can activate all your guys simultaneously. But you go ahead, you can activate your characters. Now, when you activate your characters, the first thing you do is any free actions. You can trade, some of these cards if you're next to people. You can pick up cards from the ground if they're left there. Pick up items from the ground if they're left there. There's different free actions that are on some of your cards. You can do any free actions at that point. Players can then activate. They can move. Essentially, you look at kind of your movement rating on your card, and you can move that number of spaces. There's, of course, terrain effects, and terrain's going to kind of determine how many movement points you're going to spend going into a certain space, but you can go ahead and move. Now, there's also slip away. If you have an enemy character next to you, you can trade places with that enemy character and then move a little bit more. Now, this time you can also shoot a ranged weapon at an enemy, provided they're within range. More on combat in a moment. Now, some of your cards may have minions on them. You can actually unleash minions at this time to essentially try to go after your enemies. Now, this time, too, there's also a reaction step. Some of your enemies may have reactive abilities. So if it's not their turn, they can still go ahead and trigger some of these abilities. For instance, there's kind of an opportunity fire. If you're crossing their line of sight, they can go ahead and take opportunity shots. And there's a few other bells and whistles they can do on a reactive step. Next, you have melee. This is melee combat. Now, combat in this game is very unusual. Now, you can use dice just like a standard war game or what have you, but here you don't have to roll dice if you don't want to. In fact, you shouldn't because you've got these great challenge decks. Now, these challenge decks are cool because you go ahead and anytime you are comparing stats, which you do with combat, you compare the various stats and you go ahead and you flip over one of these cards. Now, when you're comparing stats, you're seeing if you're kind of a few points under, a few points over, um, or right on, and then you draw the challenge card. And the challenge card is going to tell you, depending on what that difference is, whether or not get a hit or you miss, or just kind of how strong your hit is, or how horrible your defeat is. But you're going to learn all that just from the flip of a card. Then you're going to go ahead. You may draw to actually deal damage or for other factors as well. But this card combat system is a major part of the game and a very unique part of the game. Now, next, we have the adventure step. If ever your characters make it into one of the faction keys, they're going to go ahead and they're going to test, they're going to do another challenge there. What they're going to do is, depending on the specific space they're on, they may test things like their ranged ability. They may test things like their intellect. They may test things like their valor. There's all sorts of stats that you have that you're going to test, and you're going to test it against that specific space you're on. Again, you go ahead, you draw a challenge card, and you see whether or not you succeed. And if you succeed, you're going to get rewards. You may be able to draw cards from the various card decks. You may be getting gold, or you may get various other goodies. And the best part is, if the character taking the adventure step is aligned with the faction that controls that faction key, then you get a bonus. Now, at the very end of the adventure step, players are going to go ahead and dismiss their characters from that adventure. You're going to draw another challenge card. At the bottom, it will say a number of the dome you can place them on. Sometimes that's a choice, 1 through 3, etc., etc. You're going to go ahead, you're going to find the dome it says, or look at your choices, and you're going to place it on one of those domes in those areas. Now, here's the thing. Players do not gain points from simple combat here. In fact, how the players gain points is when they successfully do the adventures, they can go ahead and they can put down their marker there, their control marker, saying that they have successfully completed that one. Now, if another player comes in and they do that same challenge, they can remove their enemy's marker there. But because there's several markers there, you can kind of compete, and the two sides can try to gain control. Whoever has the most will gain control of that faction. So players are moving around, they are engaging in range combat, melee combat, they are taking adventures, they are drawing those challenge cards to see exactly how and where they can win or lose those various challenges, and of course they're dismissing, coming back on the domes. Now, if ever a player is defeated, he essentially places his character kind of in the defeat area, which is kind of the underpit, I believe it's called, and there's 2 sections there, and players will even have the chance to go to certain faction spaces and pull their characters out of the underpit and bringing back into the game. So players are going through all of these steps. They are going till the end of the number of rounds they've decided upon, and at the end, whoever controls the most keys and has the most points wins. Worldspanner Factions. So as you may know, I recently moved to the Boise area, and Brett, who designed Worldspanner Factions, he actually lives here. He told me about this upcoming Kickstarter, and he asked me to come over and play a game with him. So I went over there. We played a game with he and some of his friends. We had a 2v2 game, and it was very interesting because the game is very reminiscent in many ways of Duel of Ages 2. This is one of the great games of all time, Duel of Ages 2. And it was exciting to see the changes they had made to the game, the streamlining they'd made to the game, and yet it still retains a lot of the flavor and a lot of the goodness, a lot of the stuff I loved about Duel of Ages 2. I actually wrote a review for Duel of Ages 2 years ago in a newspaper I was writing for, and I think it was like my number 4 game of 2013. It's a great game. Now, the game will be released, but you'll also have the option to get kind of a second box. The second box gives you more stuff. You get more characters, more cards, more goodies. It just kind of enhances what's going on in the original game. And then there's the third box, which will be available too, and that game will actually allow you to engage in kind of a campaign version of the game as well. But the game, just the core box, has a ton of stuff. There is a mountain of cards in this game, and there's a ton of different characters that you can choose from in this game. This is a rare team co-op game in which, as I say, it plays up to 8 players. And again, if you have an odd number of players, it doesn't matter. You can go ahead, you can have one player have some additional characters. It's not going to matter that much. And what's cool here too is, depending on the number of players you have, you're not going to see a huge increase in the amount of time. Now, certainly some players may have some AP and that could play into it, but just generally speaking, when players know the game, you're not going to see that much difference from, 4 players playing to 8 players playing. Players can also mod the game themselves. They can come up with their own characters, their own scenarios. They'll be able to do stuff like that, and it's kind of baked into the game. Now, if you go in for all 3 sets, there's going to be over 850 cards. There's going to be 111 characters that you can play. Something like 42 monsters that'll be available. There's a few other things you need to know here. Brett actually broke down rule book sizes, and this is actually a comparatively light rule book. It's a pretty concise rule book. Now, one thing, too, that Brett told me is this game is what he calls a sneaky war game. This looks like this great fantasy adventure, and it is. But it's so much more. This is actually a tactical war game. You have a lot of war game baked in here. Now, obviously, it's not a historical war game. It's very ahistorical, giving the various fantasy, science fiction, lore characters, as well as some of these actual historical figures. But really, the game functions like a tactical war game. The way you're moving, shooting, like I said, there's things like opportunity fire. Stuff like that is baked into the game. So this really is, at its core, a tactical war game. But there's enough adventure and fun and fantasy and thrills to satisfy the common gamer as well. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this game's Kickstarter campaign will be up toward the end of October. As soon as that is up, I will post the link to that campaign here in the description of this video. I will also post it on the Discriminating Gamer social media. But if this looks like the kind of game that you're interested in, kind of like I say, a tactical war game that has a lot of depth, you're always kind of looking at your tactical options during the game, but at the same time has these great, wonderful sci-fi and fantasy elements and just a lot of great content to boot, then go ahead and check out that campaign when it opens up. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you once again for joining us today on The Discriminating Gamer. As always, I ask you to please leave a comment for us on YouTube, on Board Game Geek, on our Facebook page, or on thediscriminatinggamer.com. We ask you to please like us on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube, and follow us on Twitter. I'd ask you also, ladies and gentlemen, to please check out my other channel, that is Cody Carlson, PhD, where we talk about military history and books on history, fun things like that. And I'd also ask you to please leave a thumb for this video on Board Game Geek. That helps us out a lot as well. You know, ladies and gentlemen, I recently got over my addiction to marshmallows, chocolate, and nuts. Boy, I tell you, it was a rocky road.
Please somebody help me on my feet again, and I don't know where I'm going, and I don't know where I've been. Please somebody help me on the solid ground. It's a long time, and I'll be dying. Once a year I wind up in the band.
And I'm
then
4.
2 on 4. 1 damage.
1 wound. Okay.
Okay, and then because I'm gonna pull out the Adam Slider blade.
Okay. Just you do what you do. You do what you do, Spartacus.
It hits, and then 9 on
9
4.
on 4.
That's an amaze. 2 damage. Hey, he's still alive.
We hate Spartacus with a passion.